So we're actually, for part 2 of the screencast for the lesson 4 notes, are picking up on this page, and that's coming from the prior page where we ended with part 1, how did parliamentary government in England begin? And so it actually ended with this particular page in terms of looking at Parliament and how Parliament was an effective way for the people to have a voice in their government, basically limit and check the power of the king, but also for the king to use Parliament in order to basically have power control and also get money. The third question, and this is where we're going to pick up with taking notes, is going to be how did English common law develop? So one of the first things that you might want to identify is exactly what is common law, and that's in this particular area here, if you can see the cursor on the screen for question 3, which is also answered here in blue for common law. So what I'd like for you to do is to take just a quick second to read through these 3 paragraphs on the page, and you may need to again pause the screencast so that you could read through and figure out what notes you would take after reading this particular page. Now once you've done that, hopefully there are some things that kind of jump out at you. First of all, the 3 key terms, of course, but also some cause and effect. Again, causation is very important if you're going to continue in honors or AP level classes. So when you look at William the Conqueror, again, he's mentioned several times, as we've made note on our notes. William the Conqueror had a problem about how to actually make things more consistent throughout the kingdom in terms of England. So how he was going to rule and make decisions was a big problem. So he established common law, which creates precedents, and the Latin phrase stare decisis. So how this translates on my notes, and again I'd like to kind of scroll up a little bit and let's take a look that this is actually page 2 for lesson 4. How did English common law develop? Same question that I put on my notes, and so here's Will the Conqueror's problem, and notice I've abbreviated it now Will. I guess because I know him so well by now. Different laws in different parts of the country. That's his problem. So his solution, again, that's cause and effect, causation, is going to be common law. And that relates to precedent and also known as, which is AKA, stare decisis, or let the decision stand. And in green, I've noted that these are some of my vocabulary terms. So what is common law? And I've got a bullet point here. So it's like an informal outline, but it's still structured and organized. So what is common law? Where judges publish decisions so future judges know how that case was decided. That leads to predictability, stability, and it's consistent. And I put duh there because it makes sense that laws and cases are going to be predictable and stable and consistent with what we've seen in the past. That makes really good sense when you're looking at the law. Over here in pencil, I wrote, makes me think of Amendment 14. Yeah, you can say it out loud now. Equal protection under the law. And so that's a link to prior knowledge. The main thing that you need to start doing when you're taking these notes at this point in our year is to start making connections to prior knowledge, things that you've learned before, or things that you already know, even if it's not from this class. And so maybe out in the margin or underneath all of the stuff that you're writing, take a second and make note of that. Some people I've seen even put it on sticky notes and stick it to their notes, but sometimes those fall off. However that works is fine for you, but I want you to make sure that you start making those connections. And if you're not entirely sure, you could absolutely bring those questions to class, and you can ask those questions in class, like does it really relate to Amendment 14, and how does it relate to Amendment 14? So you bring those questions and we can discuss those. But if I was going to take some notes, those would be the main ones that I would find from this particular section in Lesson 4. Because again, if you go back and take a look at this section, here's William the Conqueror and some of the problems that he was facing. And so he established common law, and that's also precedents that you would create in order to rule future cases. There's the term stare decisis. You might even want to take a second after you finish taking notes and maybe go through this section 1 exercise. It's totally up to you in order to prepare for, say, a future quiz. And then the next question is, how did the rights of Englishmen develop? So you may want to take a second now and pause the screencast to not only read through this section here on the page, but maybe also to listen to the video as well. So on my notes, this is question number 4. And again, I identified the vocabulary term. How did the rights of Englishmen develop? And so I've made a couple of notes about that it comes from English law, the Constitution of England, common law, and that's going to equal custom and tradition. And that's really hard to change, because once that's ingrained in society, it's very difficult to somehow just issue a law to change it. And so in terms of looking at change over time, this is very, very difficult to do. So that should again relate back to this up here about common law with predictability, stability, and consistency. Then I also have taken a note about monarchs and judges begin to recognize personal rights, and the king and parliament, I abbreviated that, would not violate them. And there are 3 things that were listed on your We the People page that we were looking at. Trial by jury, security of home from unlawful entry. So maybe I even question, is that like the right to privacy? And then limits on the government's power to tax. And with the prior knowledge link, I have that over here too, that the United States has these 2. And you might know that, I don't know, Amendment 6 is trial by jury, or you might know that that's in the Bill of Rights, or you might want to ask a question. You might remember that's in one of the amendments, but don't know which one. So you can again bring those questions to class and ask those. So this is where we left off on this page, and whenever you see these bullet points on the page, I would recommend that you kind of mirror those in your notes. So again, we had right to trial by jury, security in your home, and limits on the government's power to tax. Then again, here's this particular section, and there's 2 paragraphs, one pretty long, one pretty short. So again, pause the screencast and take a section to read through these sections to figure out what you would write in your notes if you were going to take these notes. So again, you're kind of looking at cause and effect, and you look at King Henry with his Charter of Liberties and how that leads into eventually the Magna Carta. So that's kind of like cause and effect. So you've got some things that are changing over time, but it has a root or a base in the Charter of Liberties. And in my notes, I have that written down too. Again, I've got 1100, King Henry I issued Charter of Liberties. So again, I've got a date reference, but it's not like it's entirely significant where I'm going to ask a question on a quiz, in what year did King Henry issue the Charter of Liberties? That's not the important thing. The important thing is the significance of the Charter of Liberties on people's lives. And that's where you're looking at some consistency in terms of protecting people's rights, and how that links to the Magna Carta, that the Magna Carta is based on these ideas. There was a disagreement between the king's rights among the king, the pope, and the barons, and that leads to civil war, because King John I was then trying to take back some of his rights as the king. And so the barons are going to win that civil war, and so I made that as a note here. The king promised not to INCR, increase. Feudal dues, W/O, is without consent. Respect property rights. Now there's no new rights granted, just confirm traditional ideas. So the text kind of reiterates that a little bit. It stresses the fact there's no new rights, but it just confirms what they already had. So we need to know the rights they already had. And so if we go over to the next page, take a second to read through there. This is where it's talking about the charter didn't grant new rights, but it confirmed the rights they already had. And it says at least 3 principles contained in the Magna Carta were important in the later development of constitutional government. Do you think those are going to be important? You better believe those 3 things are important. Again, if the textbook kind of draws those out and bullet points those, then your notes should mirror how those look. So if you'll take a second and read through this page about the rule of law, and also over here with basic rights and the government by agreement or contract, if you'll read through these 2 pages and try to think of the notes you would take if you're going to take notes on these 2 pages. So then we're going from taking a look at the Magna Carta on the bottom of our page of notes here, or my notes. I've noted that the Magna Carta is really important because it's mentioned several times, and I actually had to go back, as we'll do in just a second when we're finished with everything, and review all of our notes, over to page 3 of my notes, where I'm continuing on with question number 4 in terms of the text reading about the Magna Carta and the importance of the Magna Carta. So here I've written down the rule of law, basic rights, and then the government by agreement or contract. So what I did was I took the section on the rule of law, and I just kind of summarized that everyone obeys the law, should be. It's also known as the supremacy of law. and I put an example, trial by jury. That's what IE means. Basically, I summarize it by saying the king must follow the laws too. That's pretty significant. But the Magna Carta, as I put up here, allows subjects to go to war against the king, and I even put here in pencil the American Revolution, and I put a question mark, so that might be something I want to bring to class and ask. Is this where the American Revolution gets its foundation for allowing the subjects or citizens to go to war against the king? Also, I have basic rights here from one of the pages of We the People. The barons didn't think what they were doing was drastic, only guaranteeing what's always been there, so it wasn't like an incredible revolution like we think of it as today. They didn't think what they were doing was way out there, but it was something like common sense they should have, and it was a way to redress the grievances or get compensation for wrongdoing from the king. And again, that's one of our key phrases, key terms that we'll be discussing in the future. And also government by agreement or contract, although the MC, which is Magna Carta, was B/W between kings and nobles, it suggested having an agreement between the ruler and those ruled. Well, I put a bracket among all of those three here, and I put it becomes the base for U.S. government. I.e. means, for example, no taxation without representation in the colonies. So I've got all of these things here kind of structured where you have the Magna Carta and those three basic principles of the Magna Carta, just like the textbook had noted on one of the pages about the three most important principles. And so from those 2 pages again, it talks about, like we just pointed out, 3 principles contained in the Magna Carta were important for the later development of constitutional government: the rule of law, basic rights, and government by agreement or contract. So if you'll take a second and take a look at this particular page, and you may even want to go through the exercises just to kind of quiz yourself on the content that may look familiar to, say, a quiz coming up in the future on Lesson 4, because we're going to have one. Read through these 2 areas here on the text and see what you would write down if you were going to take notes. So that page is really just a summary of what I've got here in terms of allowing subjects to go to war with the king and as a base for U.S. government. We'll go back and review all of these sections later in another screencast, just to go through and review all of your notes. But then we're going to move on now to Section 5, what is the British Constitution? So we'll go to this page, and again, if you'll take a second just to pause maybe the screencast to listen to the video and read through this section, these 2 paragraphs, try to figure out, if you're going to take notes, what you would write. So my notes kind of coincide with that first page, that I noticed that what the British Constitution was not. It's not a single written document. It is common law, acts of Parliament, that's what's abbreviated there, political customs, traditions, and respect for rules, which I've noted that was rule of law because everybody has to follow the law. And I listed the 3 most important documents for the British Constitution: the Magna Carta, Petition of Right, and the English Bill of Rights, and I've noted the dates. And I also bracketed those together and made a note that they resulted from the king or Parliament's power struggle. Now I've got the Magna Carta, an arrow going back up here, because I've kind of taken notes already on the Magna Carta, so I would expect to see the Petition of Right and the English Bill of Rights next. So if you'll take a second to read through this page now, this is the next page of notes in Lesson 4, and take a look to see what you would make note of if you were going to take notes from this particular page. And if I were a student reading this, this would probably be done maybe during the 2nd or even 3rd sitting of when I was actually reading this and taking notes instead of trying to do it all at one time. But notice I've got some dates here about the 17th century, which is the 1600s, and the Crown and Parliament quarreling. Then I've got the notes here about Magna Carta and the Petition of Right, and then this whole section is what the Petition of Right is about. So in the next screencast, we'll go to the notes for this section, and that will be part 2 of the screencast for Lesson 4. I'm sorry, that'd probably be part 3 for the screencast for Lesson 4, so that we can figure out exactly what we're going to talk about with the Petition of Right and the English Bill of Rights.